Shame will keep you bound, and I am willing to tell my story because I remember what it felt like to feel helpless and voiceless. I'm not afraid. So right out of high school, I joined the Navy. I come from a fairly small-ish town in Minnesota, and two recruiters actually came into the restaurant I worked for and invited me to have a conversation with them, and I did. And it was pretty petty because I liked their uniforms. They were in their whites. So it was the uniform that got me, but I've always wanted to see the world and to meet new people and do different things. And coming from a small town, I wouldn't say that a lot of people paid attention to me. I didn't date, a ton. And so as soon as I got to our command, I noticed really quickly that men were interested in me. But when I was serving, it was most definitely still an era where those who have been in longer than me didn't appreciate having women in their command. We wanted to be seen as equals to the men. We had signed up to lay our lives down for our country, just like the men that we stood next to, and that's why becoming a search and rescue swimmer was such a big deal, because at that time only 7 women in the whole fleet were in search and rescue. And so you learn how to have real thick skin because it really was very much a boys' club. And in fact, when I requested to go to that school, I was denied all the way up my chain of command because they were afraid I was going to embarrass the command by going and then failing. However, I think there's a grit inside of me that was kind of like, screw you. If they can do it, so can I. And so if I had to work harder, I would. If I had to train harder, I would. And I remember the first day walking into the class, the guys that I was in the class with looked genuinely confused as to how I got there. I remember they looked at me like, what are you doing here? There were a couple occasions where we would have to take a timed test where we would have to pull somebody behind us for 400 meters. Each time I would have to take one of those tests, I was always given the biggest man to be the person I would have to pull. I'm not sure if they were testing my grit or my tenacity in that moment, but every single one of them, in my brain, I was like, I'm gonna pass this. And every single time, just barely, I did. And I think they were just testing to see if I would give up and quit, and I didn't. But it was definitely a man's world in that department. Guys that I worked for, you're constantly being propositioned for sex. Walking down the hallway and getting your ass grabbed, it was an everyday occurrence. There was no second thought about it. But you just modify your behavior. I adjusted knowing don't walk down that hallway because it's dark and the Marines are on board. I'd been assaulted more than a handful of times, and you just learn to keep your mouth shut. I remember a woman who was in our command. She had been sexually assaulted, and she said something about it. There was a trial, and the man was convicted, but we all saw that she was equally punished for having stood up and said something because she was never promoted again. And when her service was over, she wasn't allowed to re-up again. And she at that point had been a career sailor. So I didn't feel like there was a lot of protection that would come from anybody in seniority. You never knew when it was coming for you. And you don't feel safe. I was excited about meeting new people, and there was a guy that I worked with. He asked me out on a date, and I came from a small town, and that wasn't something that I was accustomed to, and so it was very flattering, and I said yes. We had a great time. He was a nice guy. I wouldn't say that I was sexually attracted to him, and we were on our way back. Then he pulled into a dark parking lot. I was instinctively trying to scan my surroundings to see where am I, because it was dark. There were no other cars driving around. I didn't know where I was. He propositioned me for sex, and immediately in my brain, I processed he brought me to a dark parking lot. This was his motivation, was to get laid. I don't want to have sex with this person, but I know if I don't know where I am. I don't have anybody to call. And so I consented, only so I could get home safely. And I still had to see him every day after that. But I'll never forget in that moment feeling very helpless, but I knew not to open my mouth because we all saw what happened to that woman that we were stationed with, that she was punished for it. And I joined the Navy to defend our country. And I was not going to let this situation prevent me from being successful. Ultimately, I think it's a part of the culture. It was not dealt with. I took the test to become a journalist, and the quota for how many of those slots could be filled was very, very low. And I actually got capped into third class. Immediately, rumors started flying that I was sleeping with the commanding officer or sleeping with whoever, as if I was incapable of studying and taking a test and passing a test. I would be called a slut. I would be called a whore. You just kind of want to melt into the floor and try to make yourself really small in those moments, because the backlash isn't worth it. When I did become a journalist, I got pulled into the office of the officer, and I remember he screamed at me in front of everybody, and he told me I didn't deserve the promotion, and he listed off a handful of other people that deserved it more than me. I knew what I did to deserve that promotion, but you kind of just stand there and you take it. And I don't want to make a blanket statement and say all the men did this. That's not the case. There were some very honorable men that I served with. You know, my chief that I started working for in journalism, he became one of my biggest advocates. I remember a couple occasions where I would be walking in front of him and other guys would turn around and like check me out. And I remember he would get in their face and he would yell at them. He was never intimidated by me, and he never made me feel small. And I actually really feel like I flourished under his leadership. I actually got promoted to an E5 pretty quickly. I shortly thereafter met my now still husband. We were stationed together. I had to train him. So for 5 hours, We were stuck on watch together. I love Jordan because he wasn't that guy. He treated me with respect. He honored me. But I think for a while, because of the encounters I had had with men since being in the military, I still had a guard up because in the back of my mind, I'm like, what do you want from me? I didn't even know that it was really traumatizing until later. If Jordan and I will get into an argument and I would start to panic because I felt trapped. Just the fact of being cornered in a space that I can't get out of. I didn't even realize that it all stemmed back from being put in a position where I felt trapped. I can't go back in time. I can't undo what has happened. But now I can recognize the things that make me scared. It's been a journey. I have actually become a lot more bold, and I'm willing to go first because I think it's going to take a whole lot of women to say something all the way up the chain of command, because I do believe that if you are put in a position where you are assaulted or you are raped, that justice does need to be served. What happened to you in the past does not dictate what your future is going to look like. You don't have to live your life in the shadow and in the grip of fear and shame. And no matter what happened to you, that doesn't rob you of anything that you gave during your time in.